It's amusing how one moment can alter everything. One message, one night, one decision. I should have recognized something was amiss that day, but how can you identify the monster within your friend? I used to believe Carl was just like everyone else, ordinary, until that night. I had known Carl since middle school. We weren't best friends or anything, but we belonged to the same group. Smith and I thought we were close. We often hung out after school discussing various topics, girls, nothing serious, but recently Carl seemed different. It began with minor things. Carl became unusually quiet when Smith was nearby. I thought perhaps he was dealing with personal issues like typical teenage angst. I didn't give it much thought initially. I was playing GTA 5 on my PS4. That's when my phone vibrated. When I received that message, I didn't hesitate. Carl and Smith had been my friends for years. We shared moments, but this was just another ordinary night of hanging out, joking, and possibly gaming. So I thought Carl had always been a bit different, more intense, but that was just Carl, right? I met Smith, and we headed toward Carl. Do you think Carl is serious about a significant surprise? Man, he's always full of it. Smith often joked that was his personality. He'd laugh through anything and dismiss any tension, but even he couldn't conceal how strange things had been between Carl and us lately. In retrospect, I believe Smith sensed something I didn't want to. You guys finally made it ready for an unforgettable experience. I walked in, and it felt like a weight hit me. The atmosphere was suffocating. Carl barely spoke, and Smith, typically the life of the gathering, was just seated there scrolling through his phone. It didn't feel like a social gathering. It felt like something was about to go wrong. Smith was trying hard to keep things normal, but Carl hardly uttered a word. I wondered if something existed between him and Smith, something related to that girl Alexa, but I wasn't aware of the entire situation. Not then. Let's play a game. The game is I kill you. While saying this, he directed the gun towards Smith. When I saw it, I froze. It was as if time had stopped. I remember thinking this has to be a joke, right? It can't be real. But then I saw Carl's expression. He wasn't joking. Carl's tone was off, distant, as if he were in another world, and we didn't recognize it. I didn't see it. God, I didn't see it. You think it's amusing, don't you? Always acting superior. I didn't notice it at first, how Carl's eyes shifted when he said that. But it was as if something broke inside him. Carl, what's wrong, man? This isn't a joke. What on earth are you saying? Do you think you can take her from me? It felt like a nightmare. Only real Carl shot him just like that. There was no shouting, no debate, nothing. He merely pulled the trigger. I was paralyzed. I wanted to believe it was a prank, that Smith would emerge laughing, but he didn't. He couldn't. The room fell silent. Smith, who was just laughing with us days earlier, was now lying still. My brain struggled to process what had just occurred, and then Carl did something even more chilling. He didn't escape, didn't panic. Instead, in a disturbing and surreal act, he took out his phone, opened Snapchat, and snapped a picture of Smith's lifeless body. That's when I realized the Carl I knew was gone. He had turned into a stranger, a monster. I thought I would never see him again, but I did at the trial. He didn't flinch, didn't react when they played the video, the one he shared online for everyone to view, as if Smith's life was merely entertainment. Smith is gone. Carl is gone. And here I stand with nothing but memories and nightmares. Every time I hear a Snapchat notification, I feel nauseous. I can't erase what I witnessed. I can't unsee what Carl became. You think you know your friends. You believe you can trust them, but at times the real monsters are standing right beside you, waiting for the right moment to strike. The story was inspired by a horrifying incident that occurred in February 2015 when 16-year-old Carl Morton shot and killed his friend Smith Patrick in a small Pennsylvania town. The two teenagers were reportedly friends, but tensions escalated due to jealousy, particularly over a girl. On the night of the crime, Carl invited Smith over under false pretenses. Once Smith arrived, Carl shot him in the head. Disturbingly, after committing the murder, Morton took a selfie with Smith's lifeless body and sent it to friends via Snapchat. A shocked recipient saved the photo and alerted the authorities, resulting in Carl's arrest. He was later convicted of third-degree murder and charged accordingly. It was 6 p.m., and I was with my friend Abby. We were both waiting. It felt odd, two young girls alone in Riley Park. The sun was going down, and he still hadn't shown up. Mr. Jake was a very nice, gentle, and considerate man. He claimed to be a man of faith, and he frequently sent me money for things I wanted. He really spoiled me, which was something not many men would do. He had a strong dislike for young men, believing they were selfish and lacked kindness. Mr. Jake was the kind of man every woman should have in her life, and I was honestly relieved that he had never asked me out since we began chatting on Snapchat. Sure, he lived a bit far away, but he had sent me money to visit a national park. I thought that would be an amazing opportunity. I dressed as nicely as I could in a sweet dress, aiming for cute rather than flashy, so my parents wouldn't catch on that it was a secret. I left early, telling them I was heading to my friend's house. That's how I ended up in this situation. Was he really going to show up? Well, he said he would, and soon we heard the sound of a car approaching. It was an old vehicle. I couldn't recognize the model. Mr. Jake stepped out, wearing blue jeans, a blue jacket, and a cap. At 45, he had an air about him that made me feel uneasy from the outset, but Abby and I chose to overlook that feeling. We're just being paranoid, I kept reassuring myself. He greeted us with a shy smile and said, "Let's head down the hill." We followed him through the trees, going deeper into the woods. As we moved further away, the familiar paths began to fade, and a mist started to surround us. The air was so still that even our breathing seemed to echo off the trees. The sun continued to set, and he remained silent. Where was that kindness, that warmth? I wondered if it had all been just in our conversations. Most troubling of all, he hadn't explained why he had invited me. Jake began to speak in a low tone, but there was something different about his voice, almost menacing. He started sharing bizarre information about how he was familiar with the area and how others use the park for rituals. People in this park carry out rituals where they kill people and consume them. My heart began to race. What kind of joke is this? I asked nervously, but he merely stared at me with a smile that now felt much more sinister. In that moment, everything shifted. He halted abruptly. He glanced at us from the corner of his eye, and that expression, that emptiness, that lifeless gaze conveyed a chilling message. They have asked me to kill you too for them. I felt an overwhelming urge to run, but fear of what might happen if I did kept me rooted. My phone had no signal. Abby and I exchanged horrified looks, realizing we were too far from the park and completely isolated. As we tried to retrace our steps, it was already too late. He lunged at Abby, grabbing her arms and dragging her to the ground. His hands tightened around her neck as she struggled beneath him. Her pupils rolled back as she gasped for air. Then, he pulled a knife from his jacket and mercilessly stabbed her throat. His face burned with rage. It happened so fast that I barely had time to react. Frozen in shock and fear, I locked eyes with him as he turned his gaze on me, filled with unrestrained malice. In that moment, my instincts kicked in and I bolted. The sound of his footsteps thundered behind me as I ran, screaming for help. Branches clawed at my skin, and roots tripped me up, but I kept going. I was so close to escaping when he finally caught me. With an unsettling excitement, he said, "They'll be happy to have you." Who were they? I didn't know, but my shouts for help went unanswered. Then I saw a group of people approaching. Relief flooded me, but only for a second. One of them was carrying Abby's lifeless body over his shoulder. I heard one say, "Don't kill the other one. What good is the sacrifice?" Overcome by terror, I passed out. When I regained consciousness, I was tied to a table in the middle of the forest. My hands were bound, and a circle of men surrounded me. One of them, unnervingly, licked my legs. It was a cult that had already desecrated Abby's body. I tried desperately to free myself, but I couldn't. One of them stabbed me in the leg, and though I screamed, the gag muffled my cries. They kept stabbing my arms and legs before someone brought out a saw. The pain was excruciating, but just as I thought I'd die, everything went numb. When I awoke, I realized they had amputated my legs and sewn up the wounds. That was to be my new life. This story draws inspiration from a real case in Delphi, Indiana, where a 24-year-old man was arrested after leading two 15-year-old girls into the woods following a Snapchat interaction. The incident occurred near the Monon High Bridge Trail, the same area where Libby German and Abby Williams were murdered in 2017. In that case, Libby captured a mysterious man, dubbed Bridge Guy, on Snapchat, providing a pivotal clue in the investigation. Although Richard Allen was arrested in 2022 and charged with the murders, his trial has been delayed until October 2024. His lawyers have proposed a controversial theory involving a nationalist sect, the Odinists, and alleged ritual sacrifices, further complicating the case. I never thought I'd be afraid of my own phone, but now every time I hear the chime of a Snapchat notification, my stomach churns and my heart races. It all started innocently enough a few months ago when my best friend, Preston, shared something that had been haunting him. We were hanging out in his room after school, tossing popcorn into our mouths while a YouTube video played in the background. Suddenly, Preston went quiet, his face pale as he stared at his phone. Without a word, he turned the screen toward me. A Snapchat from someone named Talone, the goon, played on a loop. The video was sickening. A kid on the ground, curled up, getting mercilessly punched and kicked by a group of older boys. The caption read, "Who's next?" My stomach turned, and I felt a wave of nausea as I watched the brutal footage. Preston shrugged when I asked who they were, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "They call themselves the Gilbert Goons," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Apparently, they were a gang from our school and nearby areas, infamous for hurting people for fun and sharing their cruelty online. Over the next few weeks, Preston kept getting Snapchats from them, sometimes videos of fights, other times pictures of weapons like brass knuckles and even guns. Each message came with a menacing caption, often threatening or cryptic. We didn't know what to do. Reporting them felt impossible. Snitches, after all, only made themselves targets. So, we acted like nothing was happening and tried to move on. Then came the Halloween party. A week before the holiday, a Snapchat started making the rounds advertising a huge rager nearby with free booze. It sounded like a wild time, and after some hesitation, Preston and I decided to go. I picked him up in my beat-up Corolla. He was decked out as a basketball player, fitting for the star athlete he was, while I wore a cheap vampire costume, fake fangs and all. When we arrived, the party was already in full swing. The bass thudded so loud it rattled the windows, and the air reeked of booze and weed. Hundreds of kids, most in costume, packed the house and spilled into the backyard. Preston and I hovered by the snack table, chatting with some classmates, when he suddenly stiffened. I followed his gaze and spotted them, a group of older guys striding into the party. They weren't in costume, just jeans and hoodies, but their presence was enough to part the crowd like the Red Sea. Among them was a guy I recognized from the Snapchats, Treston Billy, one of the goons' ringleaders. My blood ran cold as he locked eyes with Preston and walked straight toward us. "We gotta go," Preston whispered, but before we could slip away, Treston stepped in front of us. "What's the rush?" he sneered, his voice cold and mocking. He grabbed Preston by the arm, ignoring my protests. "We need to have a little chat." Two more goons flanked us, blocking any chance of escape. They shoved us toward the backyard, where the music and laughter faded into the distance. My heart pounded as Treston shoved Preston to the ground. He started yelling about ignoring their Snapchats, accusing him of disrespect. Preston tried to explain, but Treston wasn't listening. His fist connected with Preston's face, and my friend crumpled to the dirt. "Hey, stop!" I shouted, stepping forward, but one of the goons grabbed me, pinning my arms. Helpless, I watched as they rained punches and kicks down on Preston. The sound of each blow, fists against flesh, boots against ribs, will haunt me forever. Preston's body convulsed with every strike until, finally, one of them said, "He's out." Treston wiped his hands on his jeans, looking satisfied. His cold eyes shifted to me, and a twisted grin spread across his face. "Your turn next, vampire boy," he said, his tone dripping with malice. They sauntered away like nothing had happened, leaving Preston lying in the dirt, bloodied and broken. I dropped to my knees beside him, shaking him, begging him to wake up, but he didn't move. His face was a mask of blood, his breathing shallow. My hands trembled as I called 911, tears streaming down my face. I stayed with him until the paramedics arrived, holding his head in my lap and whispering, "Stay with me, buddy. Don't leave me." Preston passed away 2 days later, on October 30th. The grief was unbearable, but the horror didn't stop there. The day after his death, I got a Snapchat from an unknown account. It was a picture of Preston in his hospital bed, taken without permission. The caption read, "You're next, vampire boy." The events described echo a real tragedy in Queen Creek, Arizona, on October 28th, 2023. Preston Lord, a 16-year-old sophomore and basketball player, was attacked at a Halloween party advertised on Snapchat. Over 200 teens attended, but the night turned violent when Preston and his friends were confronted by the Gilbert Goons. Witnesses reported that after an argument, Preston was knocked unconscious and beaten mercilessly. He succumbed to his injuries 2 days later. The perpetrators, a group of young men known for sharing violent videos online, were charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Despite the mountain of evidence, they have all pleaded not guilty, with their trial scheduled for July 2025. This senseless act of violence has left the community mourning and demanding justice.